Okay, everyone, let's begin. It's a few minutes after 4 Pacific time, and welcome to the September 18th, 2019 Brilliance in Commerce House of Freedom International Natural Law Trust webinar featuring our illustrious speaker, Randall Hillner. We are, as you may know, and for those of you who are new, a company that has a variety of freedom technology-oriented programs. We have the main flagship product, the House of Freedom International Natural Law Trust, which works in just about anywhere in the world and has been assisting people for decades, generations, in quietly protecting peaceful assets. Liberty Debt Elimination System, which has been liberating people in the United States from credit card and student loan debt. And if you haven't already, explore our website, which has affiliations with a lot of other outsourced, rare, and hard to find solutions to freedom and wealth, prosperity, and success programs. We are members of the International Charter for Fair International Commerce. We're signatories on that. There's our certificate, and there is more information on that on the website as well. Today being Wednesday, September 18th, 2019, our next trust webinar is scheduled for Wednesday, October 16th, just about a month from now. So put that on your calendar. Let your friends know. To play back past webinars, go to brilliance-videos.com, brilliance-videos.com. And if you haven't already, subscribe to our newsletter, house-of-freedom-trust.com is the main site, and click newsletter sign up. Our USA phone number, 360-200-7521. Hold on just one moment. Please turn videos off. Anyone who has your video on, thank you. Please turn videos off because they show up to everyone. They can see you. All right, I'll do it on my end if you don't. Okay, thank you. My name is Tansen Fairmont. I'm the founder, member of the Board of Advisors of Monaco Management Group, and I've been a speaker on a lot of different seminars and radio shows, author of Sovereignty Consciousness and the forthcoming Cosmic Renaissance. This trust, which we're talking about today, has been quietly protecting assets in a private realm known as natural law. And it has also been called by most people common law. We changed it to natural law for the simple reason that common law is man's best attempt at emulating natural law. And there are imperfections in common law, but it's the best man's been able to do. And that is the law of the sum total of the distillation, the synopsis, the synthesis of laws and decisions in courts throughout at least the English-speaking world and most of the rest of the world as well. And so that tradition of law has resulted in the opportunity to place assets in the trust of a friend or someone that one hires, someone that one trusts, for their protection so as to keep assets out of one's personal name. As many of the wealthy families have said, own nothing, control everything. And that's what these trusts allow one to do. And we also are the only company we know of in the world that allows our clients to either be the trustee, to choose a trustee, and choose either among one's friends or one that we recommend. So those three different ways one can go is a flexibility afforded by our House of Freedom International Natural Law Trust. And the rest of it is in the ebook. It's on the website. It's in previous webinars, and there'll be some today in the discussion about the manual. Randall Hillner is the director of our trust department at Brilliance and Commerce, founder of a House of Freedom Trusts and White Light Unlimited, trustee of One People's Public Trust, and the creator of the International Natural Law Trust. Today's topic, we're going to walk you through the Trust Manual. And as he was commenting before we began today, the Trust Manual is nice and short. It's concise. It's only about, 16, 17, 18 pages. It's not verbose. It's not long. It's not hundreds of pages of legalese and complex terminology. It's nice and simple and plain English that anyone can understand. And yet a lot of people just haven't read it. And so it's very important to just go through and read it and understand it. And here today, you will have the opportunity to ask questions at the point where we open it up to questions and answers and receive Randall's answers. Okay, so without further ado, Randall, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you and ask you to make sure your video is showing. And I'm going to also ask to start video. And please proceed.
Here I am. Hey, I'm in one piece. Well, at least from the shoulders up. Hey, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our webinar in understanding this incredibly simple but complex trust document that we have. And I'm glad Tanzan precluded this by saying, oh, it's something that we all have to do, but we all haven't done it yet. And that's why I wanted to create this month where we're going to go through the trust manual, which is the beginning, and then go into the trust document maybe next month. The idea is that in spite of all, I think we've been doing this for almost a year now. Excuse me. I still get questions, well, what about this? And I say, well, it's over on page 13 or 14 somewhere in that particular aspect of what you're looking for. And have you gone there yet and really read it and read it and read it? And if you do that and you're willing to read it a couple of times and then come back to me and say, you know, I read it and my understanding is this way, and I'll say, yeah, that basically pretty close, or what you're missing is you misinterpreted this particular phase of it, and so then I can explain it. And I don't mind at all working and explaining issues that at least people have made. You've made an effort to read the manual and read the trust document and then come back to me with your questions. I don't have a problem with that. That's my job. It's what I love to do. It's creating a relationship with you, the client, and essentially out of that, in the last number of years, I have made some really beautiful friends from that as well, who go more than just being clients. So that's always a pleasurable aspect of teaching, is that you teach and you spark an interest and people get it and they get sparked and they learn more and they want to have more. And then like right now, I'm working with this incredible, unique Dominique, and she's learning how to be a professional trustee service so that she can step up. And if you can't find somebody in your close immediate space that can qualify as a trustee that you trust, in a sense, then she can do that on a professional level. So that's what I want from more of you. Any of you that want to step up and say, yeah, I'd love to learn more of this. I'd love to be part of this process. And if I can help my little group in my hometown or even go and do more than that, then that's what I'd like to do. So that's what these trainings are about. And Tanzan has been really gracious to set aside once a month. Now he's doing twice a month because Dominique has her own show, and she's dealing with a little more details on the trusteeship and that part, and that allows me to cater to more clients on a broader general level. So it's working out really well. If anybody out there really has a desire to, step in and be part of this, it'd be great. It's not that difficult. So with that, I guess we should get right into slides. Origins of trust, I guess. I don't know if we have a slide for that, but basically here's a little something that what happened is that common law came out of British law. It started, after Henry VIII said, "Oh, it's divine. It's the divine right of kings," and they said, "No, it isn't. It's the divine right of God." And so, they got dispatched him and said, and that whole movement began to create a basket or a library of common law. And the two basic premises of common law are do no harm and honor your contracts. And out of that comes all the periphery that we have to, well, what is it if you cause harm, and what is it if you don't honor your contract, etc. And out of that came a knowledge, a whole shipload. I have to be careful of my P's and T's right at the moment. And so common law, we, like Tanzan said, we were trying to get away from common law because it carries some connotation that we don't want to, we want to dispel. And as we see on the screen here, natural law is, look how the flowers are blooming and architecture happens and trees manifest and really good things like that. And I guess you're seeing me behind a green screen, and there's a little bit of wind coming in, and I'm near the ocean, and that's my situation for most of the time. So what we want to do is get back to that situation where whatever you want to call it, common law or natural law, it is separate from what we would term statutory law, which is totally made up of lawyers and Congress and all of that stuff. And we want to shy away from that because the basic premise of common law or natural law is it is the unalienable right to contract. You have an unalienable right to contract. Those are two of the most important things in the Constitution. Was your right to contract can't be infringed, and the right to hold and bear arms. Those are two staples that allow us to maintain freedom in the world. And I'm not going to get in that other discussion. But okay, so we're going to talk about the trust manual today. And do you have slides, or should I just script sheet off my own manual, Tanzan?
The slides are showing. I don't know why you can't see them, but the one that says Origin of Trust is on the screen.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll just lead off. I've sort of been reading that. But I'm saying that they came from 12 and 1300 after King Henry, and the English people, the British people said, we want a block of, we want to create a situation where certain laws are on the books, and it's very simple, and these premises will hold up in court. So anybody, whether they were rich or poor, could step up and ask for a relief of grievance. Usually, if there's a liability, if somebody's hurt, then there's a place to go where you can get a relief of that grievance. And whether it's a physical grievance or a contractual grievance, then you have the ability to have an equalization there. And that goes into, as we see on TV today, Judge Judy and Dr. Phil and all of that stuff. And so it's like becoming common practice for people in everyday life to have some sense of what that law is. And yes, on TV, it's all theater, but in real life process, there is a way to correct any grievances. And typically in trust law, it's held in a court of equity, not in a court of criminality. Court of equity would mean that we're going to create a balance in this situation with a contract or a grievance that has nothing to do with any of the statutory process that's going on. It's a grievance between you and your neighbor or whoever that grievance might be, whether it's a contract or a physical grievance. What happens in the trust is, it protects your financial resources. Okay, so that's the reason that's primary is that you don't want your assets attached to your pocket, because if there's a liability happens, whether you're a bystander or the perpetrator of that, liability, if you have anything in your pocket, then that is subject to suit. And the whole idea of separating your assets is that you don't own your assets. You control them, and trustees hold them for your benefit, or the benefit of perhaps you have children or others that you want to help support in their process down the road. Where that came from is when the first Crusades began, all the knights of Europe, first in England and then, of course, through Europe, when they were traveling to, thought what they were doing was righting the world of inequity, is that before they left, they might have been a huge landowner. In England at the time, basically from 1099, when Norman went over there and took over Europe, the king was in control, and the king could divvy out land to any of his favorite people. And what they wanted to do is, when they went off, they wanted somebody to hold that property for their children and grandchildren in case they didn't come back. Obviously, most of them didn't come back, but they at least had set it up. And so that was the beginning of the workings of what a trust would do for the people of the land. Now, the reason it works so well in Britain and US-speaking countries is because it was a common language, and it was able to, in the US, England at the time, after they got rid of Henry, I think, or whoever it was that tried to control the whole thing. When it came to the US, the reason they came to the US, the Puritans wanted to be able to create a way that they would have outright ownership of the land, and they could dictate who that land would go to in case something happened to them. And that whole process began to start on the East Coast of the US and then moved accordingly. Now, what happened, like in parts of Europe, you had French Napoleonic law, and so they had a different process. And I haven't really studied it a lot, but I know that you have to sidestep a lot of things and either get it translated first or have an understanding of how they said it. But it's very different than the British common law or natural law. And Spanish law is different. I'm sure that most of the countries that don't speak English have a different process going on. But at least here and now, we all have that ability. We can handle daily activities like you would if you had your own checkbook. This is the whole thing. You're going to have a checkbook, but instead of your name being on it, it's going to have the name of the trust on it. And you are going to be acting either as a manager or as a trustee. And when you take that checkbook out to finance something, it needs to be directly connected to a purpose for the trust. That's an important aspect to remember, is you don't want to commingle any funds from the trust with your personal items. So I'm always saying, look, if you want to buy personal items for yourself, just cut a check to you as a manager fee or a trustee fee or however you want to set it up, and you cash the check, and then you go buy the personal items to keep it really clean. That's the most important aspect of keeping funds from being commingled. That's what busts up more trust than anything else, is people they buy things that really shouldn't have been bought by them for themselves through the use of the trust funds. And I think we've seen it all on the newspaper and the news lately, the fiasco that a lot of people have brought down upon themselves. And that's what I hope Tanzan and I can bring to you, that you got enough education to run this thing accordingly and be really very astute about it and be able to do it correctly. Another thing that is avoid settlement display. What happens is if you die and you don't have your assets, if the assets in your name and they're over a certain amount, then you will have to go through probate. And the common joke among lawyers is, the son goes into the father's office and the father says, "These are all the books here, and watch out what you do with them." And the son cleans them all up, and the father comes back and said, "What did you do with all these books?" He said, "I settled it all." And he goes, "Son, that was our financial aspect for the next 30 years." So it's a gimmick for sure. And probate is definitely for putting money away from people who earn it and have already paid a tax on it into people's pocket that haven't really earned it. That's and the same with the state tax. They get you coming and they get you going. They tax you while you work, and then they tax you when you die. So I won't even go into that little skirmish. We all know that, and we all hate it, and it shouldn't have to happen. And when you have a natural law trust, you will not have to deal with that, because the trust owns all of the assets, and the trustees are given directives as to what to do when somebody passes. When I pass, the trustees know how to take care of the finances that I have that are in trust. and it goes out to whoever the beneficiaries are, et cetera, et cetera.
Randall, did you want me to change the slide yet?
I know I got a couple more things I'll say. One of the things that's really kind of cool about the trust is that a trust can give 100% away to any charitable giving without any kind of being taxed on it. A person can only give 50% of his earnings away to somebody else, to charity, and then he can't get a deduction from that point on. We're talking about people who are filing taxes, etc. Whereas a trust can give all of its potential profit to anybody it wants to, and then there's no tax liability on the trust. And as you know, we really support the idea that there's no need to file a tax return for a natural law trust. And that's a long story, and we have all the people in place that can back that up for you. Some of you are in the system, some of you are not. That's a whole other discussion that we can do maybe down the road. But for now, I think that's good. And that's what a trust does. That's the beginning of how it goes. So yeah, I'll take a new slide, see what else is happening.
All right, establishing the trust.
Yeah, well, so what we need to do, and I think we've discussed this before about the particular hats that people wear or the roles that they have to play, is first of all, it has to be a legal relationship. So you need someone who wants to create the trust. Somebody's going to create this trust document. And there has to be something, an asset that's going to go into this trust. So that takes a grantor or a settler, however you want to call it, and that can be somebody that actually is taking their assets. In the beginning days when I started doing this, I had a great mentor in the Bay Area, and that was the first thing he hammered into my head, is that you have to set it up with a grantor. Now, what we've done, we've been able to do over the last 3 years is we've been able to create, a nominee grantor. So the nominee grantor may be somebody, well, let's go back. Let me talk about a story about one of my clients, and she was all alone. She didn't have many friends left, and she said, I don't have anybody I trust in my little circle, and so I need somebody that could be like a nominee grantor and then maybe be a co-trustee with me, and then I have these beneficiaries, my great-grandchildren, etc. So we started to do that. We found someone, I'll talk about her later, that was willing to be a nominee grantor. So that was taken care of. And then the client could be a co-trustee, and she could be that client could be a co-trustee with maybe a friend of hers. She had maybe one friend that she trusted, or now that we have Dominique with us, she is presenting a professional trustee service and is able to offer you that situation where you have to have two co-trustees. You have two co-trustees. You have a nominee grantor. The grantor, once they sign off on the initial creation of the trust, they're basically done, unless you want them to be part of it. But nominee grantor basically means somebody steps aside, and then you and the other co-trustee will take care of the assets in the trust for the benefit of the beneficiaries, whoever they are. Now, you could be one of the beneficiaries, but you can't be the sole beneficiary. So that's why you need to have at least a co-trustee. In other words, the direct rule is you can't be a sole trustee and a sole beneficiary. So by adding a co-trustee that's not related to you, then you could be one of the beneficiaries. And I like it best. I think it's even more secure if you have at least one or two other beneficiaries, a friend, a charity, anything, just some other uh, name on that beneficiary page. Now, a lot of you are involved, I know, with the RV and that exchange, so that humanitarian projects can be the other beneficiary, and that in itself will fulfill uh, that process. So you say you have a nominee grantor, then you and a professional trustee are the two trustees, two co-trustees, and then you and humanitarian projects that you're choosing or creating or supporting somebody else's project. For but I have 35 to 40 different projects on my table, and I'm going to say I want uh, uh, all of this, basically most of this, the money gained from this exchange is going to go to support these humanitarian projects. And that's how you begin to disseminate. Now, you won't have to necessarily be the project manager for each project, but each project does need to be real and have managerial people and have a budget, etc. So it needs to be real. But once you do that, then you really have fulfilled the bargain of that first part of the trust, which is to have the right people playing the right roles. Okay, so we're going to go to the trust instrument, I think, and I don't know if you have a slide on that, but it doesn't really matter. What we have is the property that you're transferring. Some of you will have physical real estate. There's actually going to be, we're working on a fourth one. There's a Schedule A, which is for personal property. In other words, you may have valuable paintings, you may have coins, you might have a substantial investment portfolio. And what you want to do is you're going to transfer those assets from your name into the name of the trust. And that's only if you want to do that. You don't have to do all of it. If you have a substantial portfolio, you might want to take 80, 90% and put it in a trust. You might want to do more or less. It's totally up to you. You might have valuable art, and rather than you having your name on it, you're going to have the name of the trust on it, and so the trust would own that artwork. Then Schedule B is a schedule for real estate. So if you own a house, you may have a farm, you may have multiple pieces of property. You're going to, if you want, you're going to assign each one of those properties into the trust. And so for each piece of property that you would have a Schedule B, which would allow that assignment of the land real estate into the trust. And then the key people, of course, are the grantor and the co-trustees, and then the beneficiaries. So, and if you're in the US, especially, you're going to have to get an EIN number, and that's a 10-minute process on the web, online. It's really simple. And right now, because of the banking situation, they require an EIN number. And all it is, people call me and say, I'm afraid I'm going to lose my anonymity. And I say, look, don't worry about it. Just get the number. And all it means that there's IRS has assigned a number to that trust, and the bank says, okay, we can open up a bank account now, and then you're set and ready to do business. And they just won't allow you to open up an account without an EIN number here in the US. In Europe, it's different. I had a woman that walked into a bank in England and they said, just show me your ID, and that was enough. Some people just want a passport. And it just goes like that. It just depends on where you are. And the Schedule C that would is a list of your beneficiaries. So most clients, if they're single or just a couple, they'll just have themselves and potentially humanitarian projects. So those would be the three people in that on that Schedule C. And then, but I had a list of, I got a client the other day and she sent me a list of, 20 plus people that she wanted to have on the list. And so I said, okay, here's the instructions. This is how to do it. You take all of these people and you go to this particular sheet of paper. It's a one-page deal, and you put in the name of the trust, the EIN number, and then you put their name on the top of the certificate, and then the two trustees sign it, and it's done. So that's a way to keep a file on all of those people, and you're going to keep all of that in each section of the trust document. Schedule A would have any kind of valuable. You can have a different page for each particular item. It's not a problem. Real estate would be the same way. You'll have a Schedule B for each particular piece of property, and that goes just is tucked into the document behind a tab that shows that each property is owned by the trust now. And then Schedule C would be the key people that are the beneficiaries of the trust and what percentage they're going to get. So you might have 5 people and you want 2 of them to have 50% and the other 3 to split that 50%. It's totally negotiable. This is your document, and this is how you want to have it played out, and that's how it's done. And it's very flexible. And a lot of times people will say, well, can you do this for me? And I say, no, I'm not going to do it for you, because I need you to start taking responsibility for this dynamic document. It's very flexible and fluid and dynamic outside of the instrument. The first 11 pages, the trust instrument, tell you what you're going to be able to do within this trust. And it's basically to enhance and take care of any asset that's put into the trust. But other than that, it's up to you and the trustees in particular to make sure that this asset grows and grows and grows. And as it grows, it can be given to the beneficiaries, or it can be broken off and given and creating new trusts with it. You might not want to give it out. You might have a different aspect that you want to hold for another project. And so you'd create another trust, and you take this, say, 25% of a portfolio, and that would be the new asset that would go into the new trust. And then it would go out from there. I think that's for transferring property. And then the next is duration of the trust. The duration of the trust over time, every time I pick up a law book, or it's always comes back to, excuse me, 21 years after the death of the person that was last alive. In other words, let's say you have, you're a couple and you have 2 children, and they don't have any children yet, and you have an asset, and so the trust, unless the 2 children that you have, unless they have children, the trust would go on for 21 years after the death of these people. So, and then it would be dispersed exponentially or on a pro rata basis to whoever is left within the family, whoever you want to do that. Now, in the meantime, if your children happen to have children, then you can also make a minute within the trust document that says that we want it to go 21 years after our grandchildren, which is totally fine. It just goes on and on and on. It can go on or it can go over. Sometimes trusts get so big that people say, we're tired of this. Let's just take all of this asset, and there's 47 people. And so we're just going to divide 47 people into 100% of these assets. And whatever that ratio comes out to, that's what each person would get. And they would receive that as a benefit from the trust. Then they have the right to either take that and create their own trust with it, or just to do what they want with it. Now it is theirs. It doesn't belong to the trust anymore. So that's how that would go. So 21 years is just a standard. I mean, sometimes you read this, sometimes you read a year or 2 here or there, but then the key people, I think we've talked about that before, that you have the grantor, whether it's grantor, settler, however you want to call it. It can be a nominee grantor, or it can be a grantor that actually puts assets into the trust. Then you have trustees. Most people have 2. If you only have 1 trustee, then it's important that you have a successor trustee. Most banks won't open up an account unless they know that there's another trustee that can step in and take your place if you are the trustee, because the bank doesn't want to be held holding the money and not know where it goes. So a successor trustee is important to have. So you can have you can have 2 co-trustees, which is always better. Those 2 trustees or the grantor can have 2 other people or another person lined up to be a successor trustee. If something happens to one of the trustees at the time, and or you can be a sole trustee, especially if you're a sole trustee and you're not a beneficiary. In other words, I've had a couple of clients who have setting up a trust just so for their grandchildren, which is fine, but they need to have a secondary successor trustee so that when they pass, then somebody else can pick up the ball and say, okay, this is where it needs to go. So then, and one of the reason we have a non-related co-trustee is that somebody has got to be able to step up and tell the grantor and the other trustee that no, that's not a good idea. It's too close. You're pulling it too close to your vest. You want to have a co-trustee that can say no to what if the idea is not good. And that's why Dominique has been so important to us lately, is that she's a professional trustee. She doesn't know you other than a business working relationship, and she knows that her professional obligation to say yes or no to certain things that you want to do with a trust and its assets. She's very good at that, and it's something to consider. It doesn't mean you can't find it on your own. All you need to have is a really trusted friend. That's what the knights and during the Crusades, they depended on the friend, or a lot of times they left it with a certain member of the church that would hold it in your stead, so that when you came back, the property would still be yours. So let's see. Okay, I think we're ready for another slide, if we have one. Okay. Let me get rid of this. Okay, now I can see the whole screen. Units of beneficial interest, distribution to beneficiaries, and no contest. Okay, so what happens is units of beneficial interest are given to each beneficiary. Depends on the number, depends on what kind of assets are in the trust, and it can be divvied out depending on the amount of the assets in the trust. Can be given out on a monthly, quarterly, or yearly basis, like a dividend. It's kind of like a dividend, but it can't be transferred and it can't be sold. In other words, you might be a beneficiary, you might have access to a certain distribution on at least a yearly basis, but you can't give that away. You can't hypothecate it. In other words, you can't loan it out. You can't promise it to anybody, because the trustees have the right to take that away from you and say, you're abusing this beneficial interest, so it's not going to come to you this time. Now, what that does is it also keeps any third party from coming in and demanding from the trust that this guy owes me money and I should get it first. And it doesn't work that way. What the trust document sets up for you is that if you have something against you, you have to first receive the money, and then they can go and attach you for that money, but they can't get it directly from the trust. So in order for you to escape that, you may say to the trustees, I think you should just hold my beneficial interests for a period of time until I rectify this situation, and then we can go from there. And so that keeps the assets safe from a third party go after. Now, my understanding on the latest is that the U.S. government, of course, has told the court that, no, we're going to be able to step in, and if this guy owes tax money, then we're going to go rob his assets in the trust, which is fairly typical of our government, but that's the way it is. And then the no contest clause that exists in there, we've put in, we worked on it for a long time. It's so that if you're a beneficiary and in our trust, we have the ability for the trustees to give more money to some beneficiaries than to others. One of the beneficiaries may be physically incapable of doing certain things, so they need more support in making their life on a livable level with a minimum of pain going on. And so the trustees can give more money to them and less to the other beneficiaries. Now, if the other beneficiaries get all uppity about it and they start to go to the trustees and say, hey, how come he's getting more than I am? I deserve to have as much. And the trustees can say, well, if you want to argue that point, then we'll just take away all your beneficial interests and you won't get anything until you begin to understand and read the trust document again and understand how it all works together. So that it's, what do we call it? Me and my partner, Tom, had a term for it, but it's called like a spendthrift clause, and it's basically it will scare most of the beneficiaries away from contesting the process of the trust document, so that they say, oh, okay, it's what it is, and I'll abide by that. And that's it. So beneficial interest and no contest clause, and spendthrift clause. I think that's good for that. I think we have another slide coming up. Yeah, duties of the trustee. Okay, duties of the trustees and powers and liabilities. I think we spent a whole seminar on this once, and I'll just go over it briefly. But there's no general powers of the trustees, but there are very specific powers. And it doesn't spell it out in the trust manual. It just gives a general overall gist of the whole thing. But in the trust document itself, there's almost 2 pages of specific trustee powers. And that's the ability for them to basically do anything that any normal person in life could do with an asset. Buy, sell, expand, do more with it, create more, and get more. And that just means that even though the trust is not in your name, the ability to enhance that asset is always there for you and the trustees to expand on all of those assets. And it's a very good thing to have. And dealing with a bank is just I've had pretty good luck dealing with a banker. Some early on, the bankers were a little hesitant, but now I've created really good relationship with a couple of bankers. And when you get a trust document from us now, included in part of that package is not only how to go about setting up a bank account, but the last particular aspect that I did, I went in and I said, okay, what would you like me to present on your desk? And he gave me a kind of a ballpark thing. So I went out, and what I did, and now I send it out, goes out with every trust document. You take your whole trust document. The first thing you do is, once you sign the whole document, you have all the signatures, you and the trustees have signed the whole document. I want you to go and make a couple of copies. You're going to keep the original in a safe place, and you're going to give a copy to each trustee. and you have a third copy for making notes in. No reason why you can't, go through the trust document, and you have questions. You redline it and you say, oh, I need to ask Randall this question, etc. And then you have a working document that you can play with. So I went in and I said, well, what do you want? He goes, well, yada, yada, yada. So I brought him back. I made copies of the whole document. And he wanted, I was the loan trustee, but Marissa, my wife, was the successor trustee. So we both had to sign the bank document. So I let him read the whole document, which he felt fine with. And then I said, you can't make a copy, but here's a copy of one is the trust indenture, which is the first basically 11 or 12 pages, depends on how I set it up. And then I make him a copy of the abstract. The abstract is it's about 12, 15 pages, and it's towards the end of the document. And if you have a document, you all have seen that. And so I left him a copy of the instrument, the trust instrument, and then a copy of the abstract. And I had clipped the minutes, which are the private part of the trust. In other words, the trust document itself is not necessarily private. It's not something you want to share with everybody, but certainly the banker will want to at least look through it and see that all the signatures are in place, etc. And so he was happy he had a copy of the trust first part, the trust indenture, and he had a copy of the abstract. And we both signed the bank card, and we were done. And that's it. So when I send you now, when you get a trust document, I'll send you, it's probably going to be like 5 or 6 attachments now. I keep expanding my attachments so that you get more and more understanding of how to take this to a bank and make it a successful journey. And I think with more of these attachments that you would print out physically and staple together, the fewer banks you will have to visit before they'll open up an account. In other words, the more information I gave them, it seemed the easier it was to do it. And in the beginning, when we came here in the mid-90s, the banks were really hesitant because they'd just been used to dealing with lawyers and never seen a common law trust and never seen, a simple contract that was drawn up by 2 or 3 people. So they were hesitant, but now it seems to be pretty commonplace. And you shouldn't have a problem. As we get closer to the potential of this new exchange and a new banking system that's hopefully coming sooner than later, it'll be really easy to do. So the next slide is up to you, Tansen. I'm a little out of it today. Expenses, ordinary and extraordinary. It's any ordinary expenses because I use almost all my whole house for doing my work. I use the trust can pay for rent, pays the electric, pays anything that has to do with a direct process of how I run my business. And I think any astute business person. You all run a business. You know how to take the write-offs for what you're needing to do to make sure the business runs well. And then any extraordinary expenses would be something that comes up but is covered by the trust indenture. So in the trust indenture, you may find a paragraph that says, in case of sickness, the trustees have the ability to pay or education or anything extraordinary. Trustees have the ability to pay that particular beneficiary more money than the other, and we just talked about that from that point on. Caretakers, I mean, if you have a big estate, you may want to, the trust can hire caretakers, not a problem. And then the minutes. Okay, the minutes. This is a crucial part, and this is where most people say, well, don't you have a template for the minutes? And I say, yes, there's absolutely a template in the minutes. There is an example of how to write minutes in the trust manual itself, and in the trust document, there is a minutes already written out, and that's what you sign, the first minutes. In other words, the first minutes, the first meeting that the trust took place where everybody was together or signed. You don't have to physically be in one place. This can be a Skype or a phone or however is the most easy way, because I have some people that have trustees that are across country, and you just need to coordinate how to do that. And then the generation of the minutes is really, it's your creative endeavor. I don't supply a template because I'm not you, and I don't know how you think and write and want to capsulize or conceptualize what is you're doing with this minute. So basically, it's just a note. You have a meeting with your trustees, and you say, well, we took care of something from last month, and here's the receipt for that. That should go into the receipt folder, dated, etc. And right now, there's we have to take a look at this particular aspect of what's coming up next for the trust. There's insurance due, there's payments on this, et cetera, et cetera. And in the future, what are we going to do in the future? In the future, some of my minutes have, well, I'm entertaining taking some of the assets and investing here. Some of the assets I want to invest over here. And I'm always conferring with my trustees, whether it's Marissa or my other two successor trustees. And then it's written down and everybody signs. And it doesn't matter if it's all on one page. In other words, I sent off a scan this morning. The client sent me a page that I needed my signature, and so all I did was sign it and scan it, and then send it back to him as an attachment. And that's all it has to be done. You collect those all together, and some of the minutes will be 3 different pages of signatures, and there's no problem with that whatsoever. But on the minutes, I want you to remember to be as creative as you want to be, and that covers all the aspects of what you had done to make sure that resolution happened. And that's about it. And just make sure everything is always signed, and keep it in close quarters, and you'd be fine. So I think that's pretty much all I got to say. And let's open it for questions.
Did you have a conclusion you wanted to give, or confusion?
Oh, yes, we talked about that, didn't we? I've been in a confusing week, and I don't want to. I can't talk about it. So the conclusion would be dial in next month, and we'll go through the whole trust indenture, and I'll show you specifically what we talked about today. I'll point out directly in the indenture next week. And the indenture basically is about this, this trust manual. They're all about the same. But in conclusion, I would say that not to be confused, we should make sure you listen in next month. Next month, yes. Okay, so
Okay.
that's my conclusive evidence to all the confusion that could be entertained today.
Okay. We've had a lot of questions put into chat.
Okay.
Let's see. You mentioned something about news regarding incorrect use of trust. So Terrence was asking about that. He says, what's happening in the news regarding incorrect use of trusts?
Well, incorrect use of trust would be to do something that is outside the law.
Like commingling of funds and trust being shut down, or I guess that's what he was inquiring about. What would be like in the news regarding cases where people's trusts were shut down? For what reason,
Well, I mean, if I look behind the green screen, which I refuse to do, I did it once. It's not about shutting down the trust. The trust will probably never be shut down because it's a valid contract, goes on and on and on as long as the trustees, but it can be attacked and it can be sued because let's say that the trust created an inequity somewhere, and so it could be sued, and therefore the trust and the trustees would have to show up in the court of equity and resolve the situation.
Have you ever heard of that happening with any of our clients?
No,
I haven't.
No. These are in law books that are, that I have to thumb through, and I'm bored to death after 4 pages. I've never had a client call me anyway, and say somebody's threatening this or that. So I don't think that it's not about getting shut down. It's just about if you are a person of integrity, you do your best to keep it clean, then you'll be fine.
When we were talking about the EIN, Marianne said, I have an EIN and I'm from Canada.
Well, you can use that. You can use an EIN number. I think
which highlights that some people from other countries use the US EIN and their country accepts it.
Yes, and what we did is we had a client that came and we started creating a template that I would send to people to create a what's called a foreign grantor trust EIN number, and you can't do it online, unfortunately. You have to fax it, but you basically make out an SS4 form, and I have a template for it that I send out to the client, and you fill in the SS4 form that way, and then you mail it, you fax it. You have to fax it to the IRS, and then you have to wait for a period of time. Sometimes it comes in a couple of weeks. Sometimes it's, you have to resend it a month later and say, where is it? But eventually it'll show up and you'll have um, a foreign grantor trust EIN number. And I did that for 3 or 4 clients in Sweden. I've done some Canada. I think Marianne has a foreign grantor trust. There's some people out in Western Canada have the same. But we also have the ability to get a CERS number for those people living in Canada. And so they can do it, I think, but I'm not sure that they can do that online either. I haven't done it enough, but
Just
you can use
Randall, the bottom half of your face has been off the screen for some time. I've been meaning to tell you if you can either raise up or back up so we can see you.
better.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, that's as long as you get a number, then you can open up the bank account. What else?
Next question from Geeta. She says, can you change an established trust name?
Yes. Well, usually you don't change the name. You would probably, I would recommend doing a DBA or doing business as. So you may have ABC Trust and you want to do business as CBD Trust. You could, I wouldn't do it if you've already had the signatures with everybody on it. I would only do it if you, like some people, I had a client that said, I want to change the name. And I said, do you have all the signatures? She said, I haven't done anything with it. And I said, well, now's the time. It's a Word document. Just change the name. Just do a find and replace and change the name. And then you'll have it. And then go get it signed. But make up your mind sooner than later.
Makes sense. Next question, Mata says, can nominee grantor also be a trustee?
Yes. Dominique has been gracious enough.
No, not Dominique, a nominee grantor.
Yeah, anybody can be a nominee grantor.
And a trustee?
A co-trustee,
Okay.
but they can't be a beneficiary because then they'll have 3 hats. They can't wear 3 hats.
Right.
So if you're going to have a nominee grantor, get a friend to be a nominee grantor or Dominique, and then you would have to have a co-trustee, a non-related co-trustee. So if you have a friend that would be a nominee grantor, and you and another friend that's not related to you could be the co-trustees, and then you can have the beneficiaries that you want. You could be a beneficiary and you can have other beneficiaries as well.
All right, thank you. And Mata also says, given that the state in most cases actually owns the real estate, they have the legal title, how does that affect transfer into the trust?
It doesn't really affect the transfer, because what you're going to do is you're going to take that Schedule B, which is where real estate is recorded, and you're just going to write up a meets and bounds process, and you just take the description of the meets and bounds, and you say, I, Ralph Cramden, hereby assign my property to ABC Trust. And then you'll have to take that to the county recorder, and the county recorder will then put it in the county books that ABC Trust now owns this property. And the tax will then come to the address, the name, ABC Trust, and the address that you use. And the trust will then be paying the tax. Property tax. The only way you can get out of property tax is if you have a allodial title, and that's a whole other seminar in itself.
Right, Mata, and for everyone who's interested, the reason BIC hasn't gotten into offering training on allodial title and land patent is because we haven't found anyone giving that technique out that has a high enough success rate to meet our qualifications. As you know, most everything we uh, share information on at BIC has either a 100% success rate or pretty close to it. And I've heard a lot of stories about people attempting the land patent process and they've lost their properties or it hasn't worked out. So
Right.
whatever you have in your personal name, whatever equity in the property, as Randall said, can be transferred to the trust.
Yes. And so you have to pay the land tax. I mean, you'd have to pay it anyway. And especially if you have a mortgage on the property, then you can't get a allodial title anyway. You have to own the property outright,
Right.
even to begin the process. So that's for another seminar.
All right. Paulette asks, where does the money come from that is paid to the beneficiaries? Does an
Well,
asset need to be sold?
not necessarily. You don't have to pay the beneficiaries. It's not like you have to pay them a salary or a beneficial interest. There may be an asset. Let's say a valuable painting. Let's say you have a Picasso and you put it in trust for the benefit of these beneficiaries down the road. And in the meantime, they get to appreciate the fact that they have equitable ownership of a Picasso. So it wouldn't be the fact that they were able to get money. It's the fact that they have equitable share in a valuable piece of property.
In other words, the money to pay the beneficiaries is the same money, the same sources of it that the trust would have had, however it gets funded. That's up to those who run the
Sure.
trust. Right.
Sure.
The whole
And
purpose of it is
in the beginning, the trust may not have a lot of assets. It may, um, some of the clients that are getting the trust to get ready for the exchange, there's really no money in the trust other than the face, whatever the amount of receipts are that they paid for their foreign currency that has not been reevaluated yet. So there's really nothing in it more than a little bit of paperwork. But the potential for that exploding into something unique that means it's not in. This is the whole thing. I said, don't go to the exchange with the asset in your own name. Make sure that it's in the trust so that you're not going to get tagged with the ownership of that asset, because that asset is going to be known around your neighborhood and you don't want people to know that it's yours. You want it to like disappear and say, oh, I don't know, it's not mine. So that's a critical aspect of the trust hiding or giving anonymity to your assets. Yes, some people may know that there's assets in the trust, but it's not necessarily out there in public anywhere.
Seth asks, how much do I have to fund the trust with initially?
When you pay the trust, you pay for the trust document to BIC in tons, and you have paid enough to fund the trust. And then it just goes from there. So the idea is that you, as time goes along, you have a business that you may use. You may assign the business into the trust, and that's where the ebb and flow of the cash is. It may just be one asset that doesn't have a cash flow, and it may be that there's other ways that money can come into the trust as an asset form.
I'm not sure, but he may be referring to the $21.
Well, I say that because you got to have something. And it used to be
When the trust is first set up, yeah.
one silver dollar, which is roughly is about $21 today. So that's all you need. You need some asset. So a silver dollar, I say $21 in U.S. currency. That's all you need. And
When
you
it's
go
first established, yeah.
yeah.
Mata asks, can a manager have the trust pay for house used for business of trust, assuming the trustee is not doing so?
The trust can pay for taking care of people living on the property and being a caretaker. Yeah, it can be used that way. I think that's what I got out of the question. Is it different?
Right. In other words, it has the right to be structured to cover the expenses of any of its officers as followed according to
Yeah.
the wishes of the client who created the trust, right?
Yes, absolutely. Anybody that's involved with the trust deserves to be compensated for the work that they do for the trust.
And that would include managers and trustees in addition to beneficiaries.
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's an expense to the trust, just like it would be an expense to if it was your own personal space. You would have to pay somebody to mow the lawn and yada yada.
This next question, I think the answer would be so long that you may want to refer her to the article on the roles of the trustee, beneficiary, and, settler or grantor. But the question is from Katie, can the same person have multiple positions on the trust? If so, what are all the possibilities for that?
Yeah, you got to choose 2 out of 3. 2 out of 3. You can be a grantor and a trustee, or a grantor and a beneficiary, but you can't be a grantor and a trustee and a beneficiary. And I think if that's the Katie I'm familiar with, then I do have an email that I need to write to her. She sent it this morning, so I'll respond to that.
Well, I remember you telling us, Randall, before that there are a lot of rules to follow with regard to those positions. Like you can't be, both trustee and beneficiary unless there are additional beneficiaries. You can't be the only beneficiary. So there's a lot of,
Yeah,
protocols to
I
follow.
think we covered that once. We covered the roles of 3 hats. So we did a whole hour on that, and that's, I think that was recorded, but we can bring it up again, and it's in the trust manual, and it's pretty much anywhere. You can be 2 out of 3, but not 3.
Yeah, if you look back on our past webinars, find the one about the 3 hats. Yeah.
I can juggle 3 hats. I'm not sure I can get them all on my same head, though.
Well, you'd have to have 3 heads, maybe. All right. MB asks, can a U.S. citizen use a non-U.S. bank account for the trust?
Sure. The trust can go anywhere. In fact, once it's established, you may have an account here in the U.S., you may have in Europe, wherever you go, you say, you have an account here, and I'm going to be living here for 6 months. I'd like to use a local bank. And you say, here's my trust documents, and here's my bank account from the U.S., and what do we need to do? You might be operating just in euros or whatever currency there is where you are.
All right. Katie has another question. Can a trust entity be a trustee on a different trust?
Yes. However, I would need to know how close those trusts are together and who else is in that basket of trustees. So, because that's kind of a depends answers, and I'd need to know more in depth on the question. But typically, a trust can be the trustee on somebody else's trust, no problem.
All right. And Xavier asked, what if your trust was open with a trustee social, but the grantor is different?
It's all right. The IRS doesn't care as long as they have a responsible party and a social security number, they'll give you an EIN number.
Which brings up the point, everyone, that the responsible party can be anyone you choose.
Trustee could do it, or the grantor could do it, or as long as you could buy a social security number off the street, just have go down Skid Row and say, hey man, I got $50 who wants to give me their name and social security number, and then you got one. They don't, IRS doesn't care. They just have this thing and they want to know. So we used to do that in the early days.
All right. Ivy says, I have a trust that was put together 20 years ago, a UBO from Pono BOG. And I think he was from Hawaii, wasn't he? Pono?
Could have been.
Yeah. That name sounds familiar. We submitted the SS4 and gave ourselves an EIN number. I got a letter 45 back from the IRS saying that this was not a taxable entity and is not taxable. The attorney opened up a bank account in '01.
Oh, I don't know. I'd have to see it. I'd have to see the paperwork just to comment on it. I can't quite understand if the trust document was maybe it was a nonprofit organization and didn't need to have an EIN, would still need an EIN number, but it would have a different kind of number than typically the trust would.
Okay, Ivy, thank you for sharing that. If you have any further comments or questions on it, perhaps if you want to email that over to us, we can
look
at it.
Yeah, I'd like to see it closer up.
Those of you who are already trust clients have Randall's address. Those who are not are welcome to use our contact us link on the website. Okay, James says, outside of education and medical expenses, what else can the trust pay directly for a beneficiary, and give examples of what trusts cannot pay?
Well, the trust can pay a beneficiary. Let's say it's set up so the beneficiary gets 20% equity on a yearly basis. For this instant, we'll use the fact that there's a cash account and the trust can pay out 20% of it to the beneficiary. Then once it gives that check to the beneficiary can do whatever he wants with it because it's his. Doesn't belong to the trust anymore.
In other words, it's up to the
as soon as the trust divests itself of that asset, and it's done properly because the particular person receiving it is a beneficiary that deserves that particular percentage of the stuff, then it's a done deal.
All right. MB asks, what can be done to set up a trust without a physical visit, and what must be done with a physical visit?
I mean, you want to come to Hawaii and hang out with me and do the trust underneath the palm tree? I don't quite get that question. Physical presence, meaning what?
Right. So MB, most trust clients of Brilliance and Commerce just do it online and by telephone. So yeah. Some who like to travel will go over to Hawaii and have met with Randall, and he's welcoming. He's happy to meet with clients, but most people just do it online and by phone. So no need to have a physical visit.
No, not unless you want to come to Hawaii anyway. But no, there's no need for that. It all can be addressed uh, online and Skype, phone call, whatever. It's easy.
Oh, so Verity asks, can a provision be set that the beneficiaries are not permitted to sell the property in the trust?
Oh yeah, that's pretty standard. The beneficiaries don't have a control in um, what happens with the trust. It's up to the trustees, and that's the. I was just trying to. It's kind of the no contest clause. I think I mentioned that, but maybe I didn't. But it's called a no contest clause, and we put in quotes in terrorem. In other words, okay, you think you want this? Well, here's something. If you contest this at all, you're going to lose all your benefit, and that terrorizes the beneficiary typically. So,
In other words, Verity, the beneficiaries have no control over the distribution of the assets. They're only on this receiving end, not on the commanding end.
correct.
Paulette asks, so I didn't know about the trust until after I purchased the currency. Is this a problem?
No, just until the RV happens, it's up to you to assign. You can even still buy more currency if you want. I don't know what the timing is on the exchange, but as long as you assign the currency, the foreign currency that you have to the trust and go before a notary or two witnesses, and it's assigned to the trust before the RV happens, then it belongs to the trust and not to you. Even though all the receipts are maybe in your name, it doesn't matter. You have assigned it to the trust and it's been notarized and it's done.
And that applies, everyone, both to the unactivated trust for those who are on the installment plan and to the activated trust for those who pay it in full.
Right. The clause, the particular aspect is in the abstract. That's why we created the abstract so that people, if nothing else in the beginning, they could take their foreign currency and have it assigned to the trust, and then they wouldn't be caught short if the exchange happened. They can the rest of the trust can happen in a very quick period of time. But the important thing is that when you show up at the exchange, is you show up with these papers that have been notarized, and they see that in fact the however they're going to pay it out is paid out into the name of the trust.
All right. James says, is there a certain legal form we need to use in order to transfer real estate to the trust and to record it with the county clerk's office?
No, all you need is the meets and bounds description. You get that from your realtor, and you can just make a copy of it and attach it to a Schedule B, and then you and a trustee would go down to the county recorder and have it recorded from your name to the name of the trust. Now you may be far enough away from the county recorder that you can call a county recording office and say, can I do this by fax, or can I do this in a realtor's office? All I'm doing is assigning this particular property from my name to the name of the trust, and it may be totally appropriate, especially if it's a realtor office.
All right. Ivy is explaining her previous comment and asking a question associated with it. She repeats part of it. I have a trust that was put together in '97 by a UBO. We submitted an SS4 to the IRS, giving them a number we made up to use for banking purposes. They sent a letter back, Form 45, saying that this entity is not taxable. They never said we could or couldn't use that number at that time. The attorneys opened up the bank account on Maui, and I have been using that EIN that we created all this time. Do I need a new EIN with your process? I also need some trustees since Pono died last year. I wanted to use my trust to be a trustee for one of your clients, but I am hesitant because of the EIN.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. You're stepping into a false parameter. In other words, if you just made that number up and it's not real, then I've cautioned a number of people about making up a number. I mean, you might get away with it at a bank, but if they catch up with you, then that's a fraudulent conveyance, I guess. I don't know. I wouldn't want to comment on that. I don't know how this guy Pono was doing it. I know there was a lot of, and that's where a lot of this common law trust stuff got in a scandal, and has been saying this is just a scam because people made up all these numbers and they didn't really go through the proper procedure. And so there's numbers floating around there that don't belong to anything. So I would be cautious about that. I'd have to see the document. If you feel confident, you could go to the BIC office and ask to have my email, and if they feel it's appropriate, they'll send it on to me, and then we would communicate. You could send me a copy of the document. I could look it over for a small fee and say, go for it. But the problem is if you take that trust and you use it, excuse me, if you use it as a trustee on another trust, but the original trust has got a fraudulent number on it or an unrecorded number, and I don't know how that would play out. I would be cautious about it.
Yeah, so everyone, those who are not already House of Freedom Natural Law Trust clients of BIC have in the past sometimes been able to retain Randall as a consultant. What is it, $150 an hour for consultation on such things?
Yeah.
Something like that?
Yeah.
All right. So like he said, you can just contact us and we'll put you in touch for that if that's what you wish to do.
Sure.
For a review, you might say a review of your existing trust or overhaul, and he'll recommend then what's wrong with it, what's right with it, whether it can be retained or whether it needs to be just dispensed with and a whole new one created. You know.
Right. Be very willing to do that.
All right. MB asks, what is the specific procedure for conveying assets into the trust?
Also, all you have to do is just you have Schedule A. You have a bank account, and you might want to take a portion of that bank account and have the trust open up a bank account and you would report that on Schedule A. So Schedule A would record the fact that you put in, let's say, for the sake of this model, you put in $10,000 into that, and you have a piece of property, and you've conveyed that, assigned that to the trust, and you recorded that with the county. Schedule C, you have the list of the beneficiaries and the percentage you're going to get. If you go beyond that and past the abstract, then you get into addendum to Schedule A, and that's for foreign currency, and that's a different topic, but basically that's where you would assign all your foreign currency to the trust, and that would be that. And then I'm working with somebody now that we're going to have uh, an ability. A couple of states have really come down on vacation rental units, and we're working on a schedule that will allow people to um, bypass that law. It's just the beginning stages, so I won't say anything more than that. But we're trying to um, keep the government out of your right to your property and do what you want with it.
All right. Katie asked, what if one of the trustees doesn't put any work into the trust and the other trustee does all the work? Do they still need to be paid only because they are a person who is trusted by the beneficiaries? However, they're not doing any work for lack of understanding of trust operations. Do they need to step up to continue to be qualified as trustee?
That's up to you. I mean, you don't have to pay them. If they're not doing any work, don't pay them. And if they're not doing any work because they don't really want to do any work, then ask them to resign and get another trustee. That's the best way to do it.
Or if you just want somebody in the background to be there as a backup, uh, you can keep
Yeah,
them, right?
yeah, but they don't need to be paid. I mean, um, like I said, in the old days, sometimes we would just the only thing that the trust held was a substantial piece of real estate, but there was really no activity. The trust took care of all necessary expenses for the house, and we didn't do a whole lot as trustees. But the client would take us out for a nice dinner. We would have a trustees meeting, and then we would have a fine dinner. And that was all it took at that time. But the more work you do, as you're doing more and more active work, I know that Dominique does a significant amount of work being a trustee. She deserves to be paid accordingly. So if the trustee doesn't want to do any work, then ask him to resign and get somebody else. If you want to just stay on, but just a name only, then you don't have to pay them. Just decide. It's your trust and it's your living being. So you want to make this work for who you are, and how you want to make your life work.
MB was asking about physical visits, and she's saying needed. Are physical visits needed to go to county to transfer real estate, and physical visits needed to set up the trust bank account?
Yeah, you're going to have to go to the bank for sure. You probably would have to go to the county. Somebody would have to go to the county recorder to record the new deed. So yeah, some physical visits would be needed if distances are great. Then sometimes, like I said earlier, you could go to a realty office and they could help facilitate that transfer. But the banker will definitely need to have you there to sign the bank card.
All right. And she asks, in reality, what does the IRS expect reporting wise, whether it is accurate or not?
They expect you to give them your firstborn, and then
Your left arm.
and your left arm, and whatever's left after that, or right after that. But I would say don't do anything as far as they're concerned.
Who cares what they expect?
All right.
She says, what about FBAR, FBAR?
That was a term we had in the Navy, FUBAR, but I don't want to say what that means as far as assembly goes. uh, I don't understand what she's alluding to.
I don't either. So I'm sorry, MB, if you want to explain more, you can let us know. And what about conveying non-U.S. real estate, she says?
Oh, yeah, that just depends on what country it is and whether they will allow that to happen. I really couldn't comment on that.
They couldn't prevent it, but then in order to honor it, I guess it would have to be recorded in such a way that they recognize, right?
Yeah, that would have to be done through a local attorney, I would imagine. Uh,
Right.
uh, I just don't know the real estate laws. And like I said, had a woman in England was a client, and she just walked in. All she needed was her ID. She was fine. So there's me sitting all by myself.
You got quite a view.
Yeah, well, I'm missing the most important.
Yes. Well, those of you who have not actually clicked *9 on your phone or clicked the raise hand button on your computer can do so for a vocal or verbal question and answer if you wish. Um, we've gone through those that have been recorded in the chat thus far. How many pages was the manual again, Randall?
That's probably 15,
15, right.
15 to 20. Uh, yeah.
Everyone, I wanted to bring to your attention the genius that has gone into this. And I'll illustrate it by the fact that there's a book, I don't remember the title, but it's by Lincoln Barrett on Einstein's theories. And the introduction explained that most books on Einstein fall into two categories. Either they are so complicated you need several PhDs and then some to understand them, but they do convey the exciting and the awesome and the dramatic and the unbelievable and incredible, profound concepts that he conceived. And the other category is that brings the explanation down to the layman's level where anyone can understand it, but in doing so, it becomes shallow and it loses all of its profundity. And then it's not very interesting. And so, what Lincoln Barrett's book, this introduction, was saying was that it was one of those few that was able to retain the ideal of both. It was in both layman's common everyday language, but it was also eloquent enough to retain the full profundity. I wanted to say that that is the case with this natural law trust. It has condensed and distilled and concentrated the best qualities, benefits, aspects, strengths, protections, features, benefits of every different kind of trust out there from everywhere. But it's done so by concentrating it all into the very fewest words. And a 15-page manual for a trust this great is, I think, quite a feat, quite an achievement, leaving out all of the extraneous, unnecessary, wordy legalese and still being strong and functional.
Yeah, well, the intention is to keep it simple.
Mm-hmm.
KISS, right? Keep it simple,
And
and
that's
that
what makes
way,
it more powerful.
yeah. And I want to make it to a layman term, and if you want to go behind this green screen here, you can read for days, but you're just going to get more and more complex. And unless you really want to be a lawyer or something like that, I would say you. And we're going to cover the trust indenture next month. The trust manual and the trust indenture and our webinars that we've had will give you everything you need to run your trust in an easy, effortless manner. No more than that.
Okay, MB writes, FBAR is the IRS requirement to report non-U.S. assets above 10,000, serious penalties if not done.
I have no idea what that means or where it came from.
Well, it's inapplicable to the trust, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Susan asks, should we wait until after the RV to create other subtrusts under our main trust?
Yeah. Yes. I'm really had a lot of questions like that. It's just have your all your currency in one trust, because once it all happens, then I want you to sit on this new wealth and just absorb it in the cellular level, and then uh, we can start to divide it out and create it into subtrusts, et cetera, et cetera.
Or if any other asset comes in before the RV happens, you could do it maybe then too.
Sure. Yeah. Then it's if let's say you had all your currency and all of a sudden somebody or you inherited a house or a piece of real estate, then I would create a new trust for the real estate and keep that currency on its own. Keep that currency in its own unique little pocket.
Which brings up the point that the classic asset protection principle is never put all your eggs in one basket.
Yeah, especially if you don't like eggs.
And then Charles said, earlier I understood Randall to say something about funds going to a beneficiary and saying they shouldn't spend them at the time. Later, he talked about paying a beneficiary for necessary expenses, which they'd need at the time. Those seem contradictory. Please explain.
Um,
Maybe it was a misunderstanding.
you can, depending on how the payout goes accordingly to when it's set up, the trustees may or may not pay the beneficiary whenever. Unless there's a necessary expense that the beneficiary does need, then of course the trustees would pay that beneficiary those needed expenses. And the trustees may also pay the beneficiary anyway, just to keep the trust easy to deal with and let the beneficiary deal with however he wants to on that. Mostly, the reason you created this trust is to keep it out of somebody's individual hands, so it's protected. But it can go either way. You can give the beneficiary for funds that he doesn't necessarily need, or you can just give him funds that he would need to have to keep a normal, you know, household level of abundance necessary.
Right, which means it requires thinking intelligence to use that flexibility well. It's not contradiction, it's just the beautiful flexibility the trust affords.
Right. It is really flexible. It's as flexible as we want to make it. Um, and again, that's why I keep going back. They say, well, don't you have a template for my minutes? And I say, don't you have a creative mind? Come on, I want you to create, learn how to create. This is your document. This is not my document anymore. I don't want it back. I don't want to see what you're doing. I want you to start using this document as your legacy to carry your asset and whatever is in your household to go forward forever as long as you wanted to. It's not me. I just will help you get through any stumbling blocks so that you can be aware of what you need to do, but the rest is yours. This is your life and your document, and you between the document itself and the trust manual and the webinars that Tanzan presents will give you everything you need for the basics. That's all you need.
Well, that beneficiary question was from Charles. Now, James also has a beneficiary question. He's saying, Randall, my question regarding beneficiary expenses was, can a trust check be written directly and not to the beneficiary first? James, I'm guessing by directly you mean to pay for a mortgage or some expense of the beneficiary rather than writing it to the beneficiary. So if I'm understanding your question correctly, Randall, that would be his question.
Yeah, that could happen, although I would prefer that you would pay the beneficiary so he can pay his own mortgage unless the property is then assigned to the trust, in which case then the trust would pay directly the mortgage.
There you go. All right. Katie says, how many trusts should one person have as a foundation for setting up maximum asset protection and for privacy? Does each asset, property, gold, art, car, etc., need its own trust, or can multiple assets go into one trust?
Well, I think if we start with about 3,500 trusts, then that should cover pretty much all the assets we have. And keep me busy for a while. Okay, October.
Meaning, Katie, that it's up to the level of assets that you possess. For example, the Rockefellers were said to have some 7,000 of these trusts in the early 90s. So it just depends on the more different assets you have and the more of them, the more the value, the more trust you would create. There is no formula for that. It's, I guess, more of an art than a science in that respect.
Yeah, I think, is this Katie from Honolulu?
I don't know.
If it is, then, you've got a couple of trusts and.
Yes, she said, yes, that's me.
Okay. So you've got two, and we're working on the third one. So, but that's all you need at the moment. And, we should actually, you and I should have a conversation at some point. I've got an email actually from you that I have to respond to. So we'll get there.
And then Charles says the beneficiary would then pay tax on any funds the trust provided when they got the funds?
Yeah, it would be up to the person receiving the funds whether they paid tax or not. And we know how to deal with that as well.
Right. But yes, they would, if the person is a taxpayer, that would be taxable.
Right. And that's what Passing the Buck, remember, we talked about that book, and their whole idea is that the trust never keeps any new profit. It always gives the profit to the beneficiary, and then the beneficiary deals with it however he wants to, but the trust is never has a tax liability ever. So it's never in question about that.
Right. Well, of course, everyone, it would make sense for the beneficiary to be a trust, and the individual who was going to be the personal beneficiary would be perhaps the trustee or the manager of that trust, meaning that then when he or she receives those distributions, they would go into another non-taxable entity.
Well, yeah, it just depends on how far along you want to string it out. I mean, and we have people in place where you can receive funds from the trust and you don't have to deal with the IRS. We have that in place as well. That's something to talk to the BIC office about. And we have very, very brilliant people that take care of personal stuff, and along with the ability to take care of anything with the trust as far as the IRS goes.
All right, everyone. So thank you. This was been a wonderful 2 hours, Randall. I appreciate it. Mahalo. Everyone appreciates it. Our next one, as you can see on the screen, is Wednesday, October 16th, 2019. If you haven't already, subscribe to our newsletter. We prefer that everyone use an affiliate link when you go to the website. And if you don't have one, go to house-of-freedom-trust.com. Final closing comments, Randall?
Oh, no, it's been a long week for me, and most of you don't know about it, but we'll leave it at that. And I really appreciate having 2 hours where my brain has been engaged. So
Yes.
thank you very much.
The feedback is coming. That was wonderful. Mahalo. Merci beaucoup. Thank you both. We appreciate your good work. And our thanks and our love and our heart goes out to all of you. We have been enjoying the quality of people that have been coming to BIC very much. We are some of the most fortunate company personnel, I think, in the world because we have attracted many of the cream of mankind.
Yep, we have. So thank you very much, and I'm out of here.
Okay. Thank you, Randall.